The Spy in the Bag. The Death of Gareth Williams. London, August 2010. A quiet, tree-lined street in Pimlico, minutes from the Thames and less than a mile from the headquarters of Britain's secret intelligence service. Behind the door of a modest one-bedroom flat, nothing moves for more than a week. No lights change, no curtains open. Outside, the city carries on, unaware that inside this building sits one of the strangest crime scenes British police have ever documented. When officers finally force their way in, they find a flat so clean,
it looks staged. Nothing broken, nothing disturbed, except for one object, sitting in the bathtub, zipped shut and locked from the outside. Inside it is a man, a codebreaker, a mathematician so gifted he'd been recruited into the world of British intelligence before he turned 30. And to this day, no one, not the police, not the coroner, not the intelligence services themselves, can say with certainty how he ended up there. This is the story of Gareth Williams and the mystery that even MI6 could not solve. Background. Gareth Wynne Williams was born in September 1978 in the small Welsh village of Valley on the island of Anglesey. He grew up speaking Welsh as his first language in a home that valued quiet discipline over spectacle. From an early age, it was clear he possessed a mind built for numbers. He wasn't just bright, he was exceptional. Williams enrolled part-time in a mathematics course at Bangor University while still a teenager, and by his late teens, he had already outpaced most of his peers academically. He went on to Manchester University, then Cambridge, building a reputation as one of the most capable young mathematicians of his generation. Eventually, that talent led him somewhere few people ever go, into the corridors of GCHQ, Britain's government intelligence and cybersecurity agency, based in Cheltenham. Williams became a specialist there, and in the years that followed, he was seconded,
temporarily loaned to MI6, the secret intelligence service, to work on sensitive projects the public would never be told about. By most accounts, Williams was not the kind of man who fit easily into the culture around him. Colleagues described him as reserved, meticulous, and intensely private. His sister, Sari Subby, would later tell an Inquest that her brother disliked office politics, avoided after-work socializing, and found London's pace suffocating. He was, in her words, a country boy who never fully adjusted to city life. He had already asked to be transferred back to Cheltenham, away from the tension he felt building around him in London. What exactly Williams was working on inside MI6 has never been made
public. Investigators would later confirm only that some of his work involved Russia, and that he had assisted the U.S. National Security Agency in tracing international money laundering networks tied to organized crime, including groups believed to operate out of Moscow. Beyond that, both GCHQ and MI6 kept his casework locked behind the wall of national security, a silence that would only deepen the mystery surrounding his death. He was 31 years old, single, and living alone in a flat in Pimlico that was notably owned and maintained by Britain's domestic security service, a flat used specifically to house intelligence staff. The Disappearance. In the second week of August 2010, Gareth Williams simply stopped showing up. On August 16th, he failed to attend a scheduled meeting at MI6 headquarters. For most workplaces, a missed meeting draws a phone call within the hour. Inside one of the most security-conscious organizations on Earth, an agency built entirely around noticing what others miss, nothing happened for days. CCTV footage would later confirm Williams was alive and moving through London as late as August 14th, seen on cameras in the Pimlico area. Sometime in the early hours of August 16th, his personal laptop logged onto a cycling website. Williams was known to be a fitness enthusiast and cyclist. After that digital footprint, there is nothing. No further sightings, no further logins, no calls to friends or family. It would take a full week before anyone raised the alarm. On August 23rd, Williams's family, having not heard from him, contacted the police directly. It was only then, a week after his last confirmed activity, that officers were dispatched to check on him. The delay itself would later become one of the most heavily scrutinized details of the entire case. Williams worked inside one of the most tightly monitored professional environments in the country, surrounded by colleagues trained to notice anomalies for a living. And yet, an entire week passed with no one from MI6 flagging his absence to police. The discovery. On the afternoon of August 23rd, a police officer let himself into Williams' flat using a spare key obtained from the building's management. What he found inside would later be described almost universally as one of the strangest scenes British investigators had ever processed. The flat was immaculate. Nothing was out of place. The curtains were drawn. There was no smell of decay reaching the hallway. No obvious sign that anything was wrong until the officer stepped into the ensuite bathroom. Sitting in the bathtub was a red North Face holdall, a soft-sided sports bag. Its zippers had been pulled shut and fastened together with a small padlock. As the officer lifted it, he noticed the weight was wrong, too heavy, too dense for an empty bag. Then came the smell. Inside the bag, curled into a fetal position, was the naked body of Gareth Williams. The key to the padlock was found underneath his body, inside the bag with him. The details investigators cataloged over the following days only deepened the confusion. Forensic teams found almost no trace of Williams's own DNA on the padlock, the zippers, or the bag's handles, despite the fact that if he had zipped and locked himself inside, his fingerprints and skin cells should have been abundant. Instead, the only DNA recovered from those surfaces belonged to an individual who was never identified. There were no fingerprints on the bathtub itself. No footprints, no palm prints anywhere.
Anywhere in the bathroom? The only visible injury on Williams' body was minor bruising to his elbows, consistent with the cramped position he'd been folded into, but there was no evidence of a struggle, no defensive wounds, nothing forced. Elsewhere in the flat, investigators found other unexplained details. A doorknob had been removed from one of the interior doors. One of Williams' 4 mobile phones had been wiped and reset to factory settings. On a table nearby sat a second phone, 2 SIM cards, and, oddly, a woman's wig. The flat's front door itself showed no signs of forced entry. It had been locked from the outside when police arrived. By the time forensic examiners could properly assess the body, the flat's warm summer conditions had accelerated decomposition to the point where determining an exact time of death and testing for many drugs or toxins was no longer reliably possible. Whatever chemical evidence might have explained what happened to Gareth Williams had, in large part, already been lost. The investigation begins. News of the death broke publicly within days, and almost immediately the story took on a strange shape in the press.
An MI6 officer found locked inside a bag in a flat owned by British intelligence with no signs of forced entry. The Metropolitan Police opened a murder inquiry. Detective Chief Inspector Jackie Sabir, who led the early investigation, offered the public one of the case's defining lines. If Williams was alive when he entered the bag, he did so voluntarily. If he was not conscious, someone placed him there. Investigators pursued several threads simultaneously. The first concerned Williams's personal life. As detectives worked through his devices and internet history, they discovered that Williams had, in the months before his death, visited bondage and fetish-related websites, including some offering instruction on rope restraint. Inside the flat, police also found roughly 20,000 pounds worth of designer women's clothing, along with makeup, all apparently belonging to Williams himself, a detail his own sister said she had no prior knowledge of. His landlady would later tell investigators that on one earlier occasion, Williams had called for help after becoming stuck while tied to his own bed, a detail that suggested at least some private interest in self-bondage or restraint play. This raised an unsettling but serious hypothesis that Williams had climbed into the bag himself possibly as part of a private ritual, zipped and locked it from the inside, and then succumbed to suffocation as carbon dioxide built up in the enclosed space. Forensic pathologists testifying later
would confirm that this kind of asphyxiation could render a person unconscious within minutes. But that theory ran directly into a physical problem that would define the rest of the case. Could a grown man actually lock himself inside a zipped, padlocked holdall from the inside without leaving behind fingerprints, without a struggle, and without help? Multiple forensic and escape specialists who examined replica bags concluded it would be, at best, extraordinarily difficult, and some considered it functionally impossible for an average adult to achieve unaided. No one has ever fully replicated the act under controlled conditions. The second thread investigators pursued concerned Williams' professional life, and here the case ran directly into a wall. MI6 declined to disclose the specifics of what Williams had been working on, citing national security. What was confirmed, through anonymous police sources rather than official statement, was that some of his work touched on Russia, and that he had contributed to NSA efforts tracking money laundering routes connected to organized crime networks based in Moscow. Given his occupation, his employer, and the sheer strangeness of the crime scene, a third narrative began to take hold in public conversation, one involving espionage, silencing, and a professional intelligence operation designed to look like an accident. The Inquest. The formal inquest into Williams' death opened in 2012, nearly 2 years after his body was found, and it would become almost as revealing and as frustrating as the original crime scene. Witnesses described the extraordinary security culture Williams operated within. His sister testified that he was so strict about vetting visitors that she found it almost inconceivable he would have allowed an unknown or unvetted person into his flat. Colleagues from MI6 gave evidence, though much of what they could discuss about his actual work remained restricted. Perhaps most striking was the response from the intelligence services themselves in the immediate aftermath of the discovery. According to reporting at the time, the head of MI6 sought assurances that any police investigation would not extend beyond a narrowly defined scope. Britain's most senior police official and the head of the Secret Intelligence Service were reported to have met directly to discuss handling of the case within hours of the body's discovery, an unusual level
of high-level involvement for what, on paper, was a single death investigation. The coroner overseeing the inquest, Dr. Fiona Wilcox, ultimately delivered a formal narrative verdict rather than a simple classification. She concluded that Williams' death was, in her words, unnatural and likely to have been criminally mediated by a third party, a formal legal way of saying she believed someone else was probably involved, even though who that person was and how they gained access to the flat remained entirely unknown. The verdict was, in some ways, a rebuke of the investigation itself. The inquest had exposed significant failures, evidence not properly preserved, opportunities missed in the early stages, and what many observers felt was institutional foot-dragging by MI6 in cooperating with police. Both the Metropolitan Police and MI6 faced public criticism in the aftermath for the handling of the case. The reinvestigation.
The coroner's verdict prompted the Metropolitan Police to reopen the case, this time with what officers described as unprecedented access to serving MI6 personnel, a direct consequence of the criticism leveled at the agency during the inquest. For roughly another year, detectives revisited the evidence, re-interviewed witnesses, and pursued new forensic leads. In 2013, the investigation concluded, but not with an arrest, and not with a definitive answer. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Martin Hewitt announced that despite the renewed effort, no conclusive determination could be made about how Williams died. The most probable scenario, according to the Met's final assessment, was that Williams had died alone in his flat, the result of accidentally locking himself inside the bag during some kind of private act. For Williams's family, this conclusion was almost impossible to accept.
It directly contradicted the coroner's own inquest finding just a year earlier that a third party was likely involved. It also left unanswered nearly every physical anomaly that had defined the case from day one. The absent fingerprints, the unidentified DNA on the padlock and zip, the removed doorknob, the wiped phone, the missing week before anyone reported him missing. In the years since, the case has occasionally resurfaced. In 2015, a former KGB officer living in exile in Britain claimed that sources inside Russia had told him Williams' death was the work of Russian foreign intelligence, an allegation that has never been independently substantiated. Investigative journalists have periodically revisited the file, at one point placing Williams' death within a broader pattern of suspicious deaths in Britain with possible links to Russian intelligence activity, though no formal charges or confirmations followed. As recently as the early 2020s, portions of the evidence were subject to further forensic review, but no new public conclusion has ever overturned the Met's 2013 finding, nor has it validated it beyond reasonable doubt. Closing. More than a decade on, nothing about the death of Gareth Williams has been fully resolved. Two official bodies, a coroner's court and the Metropolitan Police, reached conclusions that directly contradict one another. One believes a third party was almost certainly involved. The other believes officially that no one else was present at all. What remains constant are the facts no one disputes. A brilliant private mathematician recruited into the highest levels of British intelligence vanished from view for over a week without anyone at MI6 noticing his absence. He was found locked inside a bag that specialists still aren't certain he could have locked from the inside. The only unidentified trace of another person at the scene was never matched to anyone, and the agency that employed him has never disclosed what exactly he was working on when he died. Was it a private act that went catastrophically wrong, carried out entirely alone, in near total secrecy, inside a flat where privacy was already the defining condition of his life? Or was it something else? Something connected to the quiet, unnamed work he did for people who, to this day, still won't say what it was. The official file remains open, and the man who spent his career solving other people's secrets left behind one that so far no one has been able to solve.